In front of the lawyer, my parents erased my name from the will and gave everything to my brother. They had no idea I had already canceled every transfer. Now they're begging, and I only have one answer. Before we get into the story, don't forget to say hi in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And make sure to hit the subscribe button on the Stories with Meaning channel so you won't miss our next powerful story. The scent of menthol balm and eucalyptus oil greeted Elena the moment she pushed the front door open. The old wooden hinges groaned in protest. For years, that smell had defined this house, a strange blend of aging parents and creeping dampness clinging to the walls. In the living room, her father, Richard Whitmore, sat in his favorite rattan chair. His eyes were half closed, fixed on the television, blasting the evening news at an unnecessarily high volume. "Did you take your medication?" Elena asked gently, setting her tote bag on the table. She reached over and turned off the TV. The sudden silence felt heavy. Richard blinked in mild surprise. "Oh, Ellie, when did you get here?" His voice was hoarse. "Which medication?" Elena exhaled slowly, a breath filled with patience she had been practicing for decades. She walked toward the kitchen, passing the once blue walls, now peeling to reveal water stains from last winter's storms. Thin cracks spread near the window frame, like spider webs. Her younger brother Brian had promised to fix them 3 months ago, a promise that evaporated like morning mist. On the dining table sat the untouched weekly pill organizer. Elena opened it, took out 2 capsules for Sunday evening, poured a glass of warm water, and brought it back to her father. "For your blood pressure and cholesterol." Richard swallowed without protest, then stared blankly at the dark television screen. "Your mother's in the bedroom. Headache again," he muttered. Elena nodded. Of course. This was the pattern she knew by heart. Every weekend she came, there was always something, another complaint, another problem waiting to be solved. She was the unofficial mechanic of this family, fixing leaking faucets, paying overdue bills, calming restless hearts. She knocked softly on her parents' bedroom door. "Mom, it's Ellie." "Come in." Margaret Whitmore lay on the bed, a small damp towel pressed to her forehead. Her eyes were closed, but Elena knew she wasn't sleeping. "Headache again?" Elena asked. "So bad. Maybe I ate something wrong. Did you eat?" "I made beef stew, but it turned out bland." Elena sat at the edge of the bed and gently massaged her mother's temples. "I'll grab something on the way. I'll warm the stew later, add a little Worcestershire sauce and nutmeg. It'll taste better." "Brian called earlier," Margaret said, as though delivering the most important news in the world. Her eyes opened, glowing with pride. "His new project in Chicago is almost sealed. Huge contract, Ellie. He said once it goes through, he'll renovate this entire house. New flooring, new roof, everything." Elena kept massaging, a faint smile touching her lips, but not her eyes. Brian's big projects. She'd heard different versions of that story for 5 years now. Always almost successful, always just one step away. Meanwhile, his car loan payments and maxed out credit card reminders regularly appeared on Elena's phone. "That's good, Mom," she said evenly. "I hope it works out." "He's such a good son," Margaret continued, almost convincing herself. "He thinks about us all the time. He said, 'Mom, when I succeed, you and Dad won't have to worry about a thing. I'll handle everything.' You saw his graduation picture, didn't you? So handsome." Elena looked at the wall opposite the bed. A large framed photo of Brian in his engineering graduation gown hung proudly. Next to it was his lavish wedding portrait, partly funded quietly by Elena herself. There was no photo of Elena's community college graduation. Her mother once said the wall was too crowded. Besides, a business administration diploma wasn't as prestigious as an engineering degree. "Yes, Mom," she whispered. "Very handsome." A familiar ache pierced her chest. She pressed it down until nothing showed on the surface. Later, back in the living room, Elena pulled out a folder from her bag. electricity, water, internet, mortgage statements. She sorted them carefully, opened her banking app, and began transferring funds. Her fingers moved quickly, efficiently. This had been her ritual every 25th of the month for the past 10 years. Her parents had handed all financial matters to her once she started working. Elena is more detail-oriented, they used to say. Brian's brain is for business, not small stuff like this. Her phone vibrated. Not a banking notification. An unknown number. Normally, she would ignore it, but something made her answer. "Good afternoon. Is this Miss Elena Whitmore?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Daniel Harper from Harper & Cole Legal Associates. I represent Mr. Richard Whitmore and Mrs. Margaret Whitmore." Elena's heart began to pound. "A lawyer? Is something wrong? Are my parents okay?" "They're fine, ma'am. We simply need to discuss several important family documents. Per our client's instructions, we request your presence along with Mr. Richard Whitmore and Mrs. Margaret Whitmore at our office this Tuesday at 10 a.m. "Family documents?" she repeated slowly. A chill crept in her voice. "Yes, family administrative matters." She paused. Something felt off, cold, ominous. "All right, please text me the address." "Of course. Thank you for your time." The call ended. Elena stared at the dark screen. The room suddenly felt quieter. The scent of menthol that once felt comforting now seemed suffocating. The cracks in the wall looked deeper, like something was about to shatter. The drive to the law firm felt tense. Elena drove her father's old sedan, the car she maintained more often than Brian ever did, despite his mechanical expertise. Richard sat silently in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead as if seeing something invisible beyond the windshield. In the back seat, Margaret fussed over Brian's tailored blazer. "Let Brian do most of the talking. You're the college graduate, sweetheart. You speak more professionally. Maybe this is about an investment opportunity." Brian chuckled confidently. "Relax, Mom. Leave it to me." He glanced at Elena in the rearview mirror. "Don't look so tense, Ellie. Think of it as a family outing." Elena tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She had a feeling this was anything but. Elena gripped the steering wheel tighter. The air inside the car felt suffocating, even though the AC hummed loudly. A bad feeling crept along the back of her neck, cold and unpleasant, like invisible fingers brushing her skin. She tried to shake it off. Maybe this is just about property paperwork. Maybe a routine power of attorney update like the ones I've always handled. But then, why at a law firm? And why did everyone have to be present? Harper & Cole Legal Associates occupied an old brick office building in a quiet business district of Cleveland, Ohio. The interior was dominated by dark brown tones and heavy wooden furniture. The scent of old paper and furniture polish filled the air, so different from the menthol balm that defined her parents' house. A young receptionist led them into a small conference room. Daniel Harper was already there, seated behind a large, polished mahogany desk. The middle-aged attorney offered a thin smile that didn't quite reach his sharp eyes behind thick-framed glasses. Elena chose the chair farthest away. Brian quickly positioned himself beside their mother, directly across from the attorney. "Thank you for coming," Harper began calmly. He pulled a thick folder from his drawer. "Let's get straight to the point. Mr. Richard Whitmore and Mrs. Margaret Whitmore came to me last month with the intention of organizing and restructuring their assets while they are still in good health." Elena felt a small wave of relief. So it was estate planning. That made sense, dividing inheritance ahead of time to prevent future conflict. Harper opened the folder and removed several neatly bound documents. "This is a living gift deed. Unlike a traditional will that takes effect after death, this deed transfers ownership immediately upon signing and notarization. This reflects your parents' explicit wishes." Elena's heart began pounding again. She glanced at her parents. Her father, Richard, stared down at his clasped hands. Her mother, Margaret, kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, lips pressed into a thin, hardened line. "I will read the key points," Harper continued. "Asset number 1, the residential property located at 742 Sparrow Lane, Cleveland, Ohio. Their home. This property is hereby fully transferred and granted to their biological son, Mr. Brian Whittemore." Elena's world stopped spinning. The words echoed inside her skull. She must have misheard. Asset number 2, a 2-acre farmland property located outside Springfield, Illinois. Harper's voice remained mechanical. "This property is likewise fully transferred to their biological son, Mr. Brian Whittemore." Elena turned slowly toward Brian. He was trying to maintain a neutral expression, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Victory flashed in his eyes. Then she looked at her mother. Margaret met her gaze for only a fraction of a second. In her eyes was something strange, a mixture of justification and buried guilt. "And lastly," Harper paused, lifting his eyes to meet Elena's, a flicker of sympathy crossed his face. He looked back down. "To our daughter, Elena Whittemore, we have provided sufficient education to ensure her independence. We are proud and confident that she has grown into a strong woman capable of supporting herself. Therefore, with a heavy heart yet firm conviction, all remaining assets are entrusted entirely to our son, Mr. Brian Whittemore, as provision for his future and as security for our old age." Each word pierced her like a blade of ice. Her independence, her hard work, everything she had achieved alone. All of it was now the reason she was being cut out. She was the tree considered strong enough to survive without water. Brian was the delicate sapling that required constant fertilizing, with the entire family fortune. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost physical. Elena felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and numb. She studied each face. Her father, still looking down, shoulders trembling slightly. Her mother holding Brian's hand as if strengthening him. Brian no longer bothering to hide his satisfied smile. "That concludes the document," Harper said gently. "I now ask Mr. and Mrs. Whittemore, along with Mr. Brian Whittemore, to sign in the indicated spaces." One by one, they signed. Margaret's hand was steady. Richard's hesitated, but the signature was completed. Brian's pen moved quickly and firmly. Then Harper slid another sheet toward Elena. "This is simply an acknowledgement that you, Ms. Whittemore, were present when the deed was read." He placed a pen beside it. Elena stared at the black, gleaming object under the overhead light. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. They were waiting for her to sign her own erasure, waiting for her to legitimize her removal from the family record. Slowly, she lifted her head. She looked at her father, forcing him to meet her gaze. He finally did. In his eyes, she saw fragility, shame, trembling regret. Then she turned to her mother. Margaret's expression was cold, challenging. Elena did not pick up the pen. She did not speak. She simply shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then she stood. She smoothed her blouse, which suddenly felt too tight against her chest, and walked out of the room without looking back. Behind her, she heard her mother call her name sharply. But Elena kept walking, past the confused receptionist, through the glass doors, out into the hot, humid Ohio air. The air of freedom, sharp and painful against her skin. No one spoke during the drive home. The silence inside the car was heavier than before. The old engine's rumble, distant traffic horns, everything sounded muffled behind the thick wall of betrayal that had just been built between them. Elena drove with an empty gaze. Her hands shifted gears and turned the wheel mechanically. She could feel her mother's stare from the back seat, sharp as a dagger. She refused to look in the rearview mirror. The moment the car stopped in the garage, before Elena even turned off the engine, Margaret threw the door open violently. "Wait," she snapped as Elena reached for the handle. Elena turned off the engine. Silence swallowed the car again, this time more suffocating than before. "You think what you did back there was polite, Elena?" her mother snapped, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "Walking out like that in front of the attorney. Where exactly are your father and I supposed to put our faces now?" Elena said nothing. She stared straight ahead at the stained garage door. "Oh, come on, Mom," Brian chimed in from the back seat, his tone dripping with condescension. "Ellie's a strong, independent woman now, remember? Maybe she thinks she doesn't owe her parents basic manners anymore. She's got bigger responsibilities, right?" The mockery pierced through the numbness that had wrapped around Elena's heart. She took a slow, steady breath, opened the door, and stepped out of the car. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I'm just grabbing the rest of my things from my room," she said coldly without turning around, and walked into the house. Behind her, she heard Margaret muttering angrily, calling her ungrateful. She didn't care. As expected, her father had already disappeared into his bedroom, retreating from confrontation. Coward. Her old bedroom now resembled a storage unit. Cardboard boxes filled with Brian's old belongings were stacked in the corner. Only a few of her books remained on the shelf, along with a small wooden keepsake box from childhood. She picked up the box and gathered the few clothes still hanging in the closet. As she packed, her eyes fell on a blue folder sitting on her dusty desk. She opened it. Inside was a notarized financial power of attorney signed by her parents 10 years ago. It granted her full authority over their accounts, bills, and payments. They had handed it to her gladly back then, said finances were too stressful for them. The irony made her lips curl faintly. They had given her the knife, and now they were surprised she knew how to hold it. Without hesitation, Elena slipped the folder into her bag. "Where are you going?" Margaret demanded sharply as Elena passed through the living room. "Home," Elena answered briefly. "Oh, so this isn't your home anymore?" Elena paused at the doorway. For the first time since leaving the law firm, she looked directly into her mother's eyes. "You made that clear yourself today, in front of the attorney." Margaret's face paled. Her mouth opened, ready to fire back, but no words came. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at one another, one filled with anger and self-righteousness, the other filled with hurt that had frozen solid. Then Elena walked out. That night, in her small studio apartment in downtown Cleveland, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced the narrow room. The pain in her chest throbbed like an open wound. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces. Brian's satisfied smile, her mother's cold stare, her father's shame-filled expression. The clause echoed in her mind. "We are confident she has become a strong woman capable of supporting herself." They praised her strength only to abandon her without guilt. They applauded her independence to justify their injustice. Slowly, the paralyzing pain inside her began to transform into something colder, clearer. Anger. Focused anger. She stopped pacing and sat down at her laptop. Her trembling fingers opened an old folder titled Parents, Financial Records. Inside were years of spreadsheets, electricity payments logged month after month, mortgage installments always paid on time, medical expenses for her father, everything meticulously documented. Proof of years of quiet devotion, proof of loyalty repaid with betrayal. Enough. Her hands steadied. She logged into the online banking portal, username and password etched into memory. The dashboard of her parents' joint account appeared on screen. There, under scheduled transactions, everything was neatly arranged. A large transfer set to move tens of thousands of dollars into Brian Whitmore's personal account, scheduled for execution the following morning. Automatic payments for the house mortgage, credit card bills, health insurance premiums, all maintained by the hands they had just cast aside. For a moment, she hesitated. Her father's fragile face flashed in her mind, her mother complaining about headaches. Was she about to become as cruel as they were? Then she remembered their eyes at the law firm. They hadn't looked at her like a daughter. They had looked at her like a solved problem, a burden lifted. They wanted her to be independent. Fine. She would show them what independence truly meant, and she would teach them the meaning of consequences. She clicked on the scheduled transfer to Brian's account. The cancel button glowed on the screen. She pressed it. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this transaction? Her finger clicked. Yes. The instruction vanished from the list. Next, she opened the Scheduled Payments tab. Mortgage, electricity, water, insurance. One by one, she deleted them. She did not reroute the money to herself. She did not take a single cent. She simply stopped working without pay. She stopped being the invisible pillar. When the final payment was removed, the screen looked clean, empty, like her heart. She closed the laptop. The room fell into darkness and silence. But this silence felt different, not despair, power. Somewhere in this city, a ticking bomb had just been set, and she would wait patiently for the explosion. A month passed in strange silence. No phone calls from her mother complaining about migraines, no texts from her father asking her to pick up prescriptions, no calls from Brian, no 2-minute small talk before eventually asking to borrow money. Her phone became quiet. It vibrated only for work emails or hollow social media notifications. At first, the silence was deafening, a gaping void where her routine devotion had once lived. But slowly, steadily, Elena began filling that void with herself. She started staying late at work, not out of obligation, but because she rediscovered a spark in what she did. Her supervisor praised her improved performance and assigned her a challenging new project. For the first time in years, she felt accomplishment that belonged solely to her, unshadowed by the responsibility of carrying others. On weekends, she no longer rushed to her parents' house. Instead, she explored Cleveland. She found a small coffee shop tucked into a narrow alley that served the best Ethiopian roast she had ever tasted. She bought 2 small succulents for her apartment windowsill, a touch of life against cold concrete. She began reading again, immersing herself in thick novels she'd never had time for before, allowing other people's stories to fill her mind, instead of constant worry about her family. Of course, the pain didn't disappear. The wound of betrayal was far too deep to heal in 30 days. Sometimes, when she saw a family walking through a mall, heard a father laughing with his daughter, watched a mother gently fixing her child's hair, a thin slice of pain would reopen in her chest. One night, she opened her contact list and stared for a long time at Mom and Dad. There was an impulsive urge to press call, to hear their voices, to make sure they were okay. But the image of that cold conference room at Harper & Cole Legal Associates resurfaced in her mind. Instead, she muted their notifications. She wasn't strong enough to delete them, but she wasn't ready to hear them either. It was a Friday afternoon at the end of the month. Elena was having lunch with her coworker, Rebecca, at a busy cafe near their office in downtown Cleveland. They were laughing about a difficult client from earlier that morning. For a moment, Elena felt light, almost normal. For a moment, she forgot the burden she had finally laid down. Then her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Margaret Whitmore. Her heart seemed to stop for a split second before racing wildly. The first contact in a month. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the phone. Rebecca's voice faded into the background. She opened the message. No greeting. No "how are you?" No small talk. Just one short, direct sentence. "Elena, the mortgage payment is overdue. The bank called your father this morning." She stared at the screen, reading it over and over. So, the time bomb had finally exploded. She could picture the scene at the house. Her mother ordering her father to call the bank. Her father reluctantly doing so, only to discover the automatic payment Elena used to handle had never gone through. Panic turning into anger. And finally, they remembered her, not as a daughter, but as the bill payer, the problem solver. "Elena, are you okay?" Rebecca's voice cut in gently. "You look really pale." "I'm fine, just something important." She looked back down at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. A part of her, the part trained to be the dutiful daughter, screamed to fix this immediately. She could open the banking app right now and transfer the money. It would be that easy. Old habits die hard. The thought of her parents losing their home, the house they had lived in their entire lives, made her waver. But then the clause echoed again in her mind, louder than ever. As security for our old age. That security was Brian, not her. The house was no longer her home. It was Brian's house. The responsibility was no longer hers. It was his. They had made their choice clearly in that air-conditioned office. Now they had to live with it. She typed, deleted, typed again. She didn't want to sound emotional. She didn't want to sound angry. She just wanted to sound final. At last, she wrote two words that felt unbearably heavy and strangely liberating. "Not my responsibility." She hit send before she could change her mind. 1 checkmark, 2 blue checkmarks. Red. Elena held her breath. She expected fury, insults, maybe even begging. The typing indicator appeared briefly on the screen, then disappeared. No reply. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Elena knew the battle might be over, but the war had just begun. And for the first time, she wouldn't fight it as the obedient daughter. She would fight it as herself. The explosion didn't come as a text message. It came 10 minutes later, shrill and relentless. Mom calling. Elena's hand felt cold as she swiped to answer. "Hello?" "Elena." Her mother's voice no longer sounded weak or sickly. It was sharp, piercing, trembling with rage. "What kind of child are you? Do you want your parents homeless in their old age? Huh? Where is your conscience?" Elena closed her eyes briefly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Mom, please calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." Margaret's voice rose an octave. "The bank is threatening foreclosure and you say calm down? After everything we gave you, this is how you repay us? How could you, Elena? How could you?" "It's not my responsibility anymore, Mom," she said quietly. Each word felt like swallowing glass. "The deed was clear. The house belongs to Brian. You said he is your security for old age." There was a brief silence, then a horrifying, sarcastic laugh. "Brian? You're blaming your brother?" Margaret snapped. "He's building his business from the ground up. He needs capital. You have a stable salary, a comfortable life, and you're calculating money against your own parents? You ungrateful child." Ungrateful. The word hit like a physical blow, the ultimate weapon, the word always used to silence her, to make her feel guilty for having boundaries. "Then tell Brian to sell one of the assets you gave him," Elena replied. Her voice sounded colder than she expected. "You heartless girl," her mother screamed. "Listen carefully, Elena. If anything happens to this house, don't you ever step foot here again. Don't ever call us your parents. We don't have a daughter as cruel as you." Click. The line went dead. Elena slowly lowered her phone. Her ears were ringing. In the middle of the crowded cafe, she suddenly felt completely alone. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind, carving a canyon that felt impossible to cross. But the attack wasn't over. The next afternoon, while Elena was leading a small meeting at work, the receptionist called her office in a panic. "Elena, I'm sorry, but someone is here demanding to see you. He says he's your brother." Her stomach dropped. She quickly ended the meeting and hurried to the lobby. There stood Brian Whitmore, face flushed red, breathing heavily. Several employees pretending to work while stealing curious glances. "Ellie," Brian shouted the moment he saw her, not caring who was watching. "What the hell are you doing?" "Brian, don't cause a scene," Elena hissed, trying to pull him toward a quieter corner. He shoved her hand away. "I don't care. I want answers. Why did you cancel the transfers? Why did you stop paying the bills? Did you do this on purpose to ruin me?" "That wasn't my money, Brian," Elena replied, her voice low but firm. "The bills are your responsibility now." "Responsibility?" Brian let out a harsh, desperate laugh. "My project needs funding, Claire. That money was supposed to be my capital. How am I supposed to pay the mortgage if you're holding it back? You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. You could never stand that Mom and Dad loved me more. And now, this is your revenge, hurting them just to get back at me." Every accusation that came out of Daniel's mouth felt like a slap. He twisted the facts effortlessly, painting Claire as the vindictive villain and himself as the helpless victim. The truth that his grand business venture was nothing but smoke and mirrors, and that he was flat broke, was buried beneath his explosive anger. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling security." Her voice was ice cold. Daniel glared at her, eyes blazing. "Fine, go ahead. Throw out your only brother. Let everyone see what kind of person you really are. But remember this, Claire, if anything happens to Mom and Dad, it's on you." With that, he turned and stormed out of the lobby of the downtown Seattle office building, leaving Claire standing frozen under the weight of dozens of curious stares from her coworkers. Shame and pain burned through her chest. That night, alone in her apartment overlooking the gray skyline of the city, Claire's defenses finally collapsed. Her mother's insults and her brother's accusations echoed relentlessly in her mind. Ungrateful, cruel, jealous, it's all your fault. She sank to the cold hardwood floor, hugging her knees. Were they right? Was she really that heartless? Images of her aging father, frail, soft-spoken, flashed before her. Her mother, always complaining about her health. Had her pursuit of fairness turned into unforgivable cruelty? Guilt crept in, thick and suffocating, strangling her logic. She wanted to grab her phone, call the bank, wire the money, fix everything, end this nightmare. She wanted to go back to being the old Claire, the one who swallowed every hurt for the sake of peace, even if that peace had always been a lie. The tears she'd held back for a month finally fell. She cried silently, a cry born from the deepest exhaustion of the soul. She had won the battle, yet she felt utterly defeated. She was free, but trapped inside a cage of isolation she'd built herself. At the height of her victory, she had fallen to her lowest point, alone, shattered, doubting everything. Her phone rang again. Dad. She stared at the screen with swollen eyes, but couldn't move her finger to answer. She let it ring until silence swallowed the room once more. The silence now felt like punishment. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch in the dark, letting the missed calls from her father fade unanswered. But somewhere in that emptiness, something shifted. After the storm of tears and guilt subsided, what remained wasn't despair. It was clarity, cold, frightening clarity. Her anger and pain were still there, but now another question rose above them. Why? Why would her parents, especially her father, whom she had always believed to be more reasonable, go this far? Blind favoritism was one thing. Erasing a daughter from the family's financial legacy was another. That was extreme. Extreme decisions are born from panic, from fear, from lies. The unanswered call from her father no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a crack in the fortress they had built. Something inside her knew she'd never truly be free until she understood the root of the betrayal. She needed the truth, not her mother's fury, not her brother's manipulation. The next morning, dark circles under her eyes, barely concealed by makeup, Claire did something unexpected. She called Harrison and Cole, LLP, the law firm in downtown Seattle that had handled the asset transfer, and requested another appointment with Mr. Harrison. This time, she went alone. He welcomed her into the same polished conference room, the room that had witnessed the unraveling of her world. His expression was difficult to read, part professionalism, part quiet sympathy. "Is there something I can help you with, Miss Bennett?" he asked carefully. Claire sat upright, hands clenched in her lap to steady their trembling. "Mr. Harrison, I'm not asking you to violate attorney-client privilege. I just want to understand. You're the only neutral party who knows what really happened." She met his gaze steadily. "When that deed was prepared, when my parents came to you, was there something unusual? Were they under pressure? I'm not asking as a hurt daughter. I'm asking as someone who needs to understand how her family fell apart." Mr. Harrison was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, he exhaled. "What I discuss with my clients is confidential," he said. Then he paused, as though making a decision. "But I can say this. The decision didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a long process, driven by significant concern, particularly about your brother's future." "Concern about what?" Claire pressed gently. "Several months before they came to me, it appears your brother Daniel encountered serious financial trouble. He came to your parents with a story." "What kind of story?" "He claimed his business partner had defrauded him, leaving him with substantial debt owed to third parties. He convinced your parents that these creditors wouldn't just pursue him, they would go after any assets connected to him, including family property." Claire felt the world tilt. "According to Daniel," Mr. Harrison went on, his voice quieter now, "the only way to protect the house and other family assets from seizure was to consolidate them under one name, his. He presented it as a strategic move to safeguard everything, not to claim an inheritance." Claire held her breath. "Then why remove my name?" she whispered. Mr. Harrison looked at her with unmistakable sympathy. "He told your parents that if your name remained attached to any of the assets, those creditors might harass you as well. He said he didn't want his sister, who had a stable career and a peaceful life, to be dragged into his problems. He framed removing your name as an act of protection." In that instant, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The lie had been perfect, calculated. Daniel hadn't just manipulated their parents' affection, he had manipulated their greatest fear, losing everything and failing to protect their children. He used Claire as a shield, turning her lifelong sacrifices into supposed proof of his love. He had painted himself as the heroic younger brother, willing to shoulder the burden alone, to protect his sister. It all made sense now. The panic in her mother's voice, the shame in her father's eyes, their unwavering belief that they had done the right thing, even if it hurt her. They weren't monsters. They were frightened parents, misguided, blinded by favoritism, and devastatingly easy to deceive by their golden son. Claire thanked Mr. Harrison in a hoarse voice and walked out of the office of Harrison & Co., LLP. The anger she felt now was different. It was no longer the burning rage of a wounded victim, but the cold fury of someone who had seen the truth, the anger of a judge. She got into her car but didn't start the engine right away. She sat there in the parking garage in downtown Seattle for several minutes, letting the truth settle into her bones. Now she had ammunition. She had the ultimate weapon Daniel did not. Truth. She knew exactly what she had to do. There was no more doubt, no more guilt, only a clear objective. She started the engine. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel as she shifted into drive and pulled out of the lot. This time, she wasn't heading back to her quiet apartment overlooking Puget Sound. She turned the wheel in the opposite direction, toward 7 Sparrow Lane in Bellevue. She was going home, not to surrender, not to beg. She was going home for war. The wooden front door creaked the same way it always had when Claire pushed it open. But this time, she didn't step inside as the dutiful daughter. She stepped in as a judge. The atmosphere inside the house was heavy, suffocating. The living room lights were dim, as if intentionally hiding the dust on the furniture and the despair on the faces of its occupants. On the faded velvet sofa sat her parents, Robert and Margaret Bennett, side by side. Across from them, in a wicker chair, Daniel shifted restlessly, gripping his phone in both hands. They had clearly been in the middle of a heated argument before Claire's arrival froze them mid-sentence. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her in identical shock. Margaret was the first to recover. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her pale face hardening instantly. "Haven't you done enough? Haven't you heard us enough already?" Claire closed the door softly behind her. The click echoed loudly in the tense silence. She didn't answer her mother. Her eyes locked directly onto her brother. "I'm here to talk about Daniel's debts," she said. Her voice was calm, clear. It cut through the room like glass. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Robert lifted his head in confusion. Margaret frowned. Daniel's face drained of color. "What debts?" Daniel shot back quickly, his voice rising slightly. "Stop making things up, Claire. Are you trying to slander me now?" Claire walked slowly toward the coffee table, every movement controlled. She placed her car keys down deliberately. "I'm not making anything up, Dan. I'm talking about the debt you used as an excuse to deceive Mom and Dad." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The debt to those so-called collectors who were supposedly going to seize this house. The debt you used as justification to protect me by removing my name from every family asset." Each sentence was delivered with precise surgical coldness. Daniel flinched as if struck. He shot a panicked glance at her parents, searching for backup. "What are you talking about?" Margaret demanded, anger now mixed with confusion. Claire didn't look away from Daniel. "If the debt is real, I want to help," she said evenly. "So let's settle this right now in front of Mom and Dad. What's the name of the collection agency, Dan? What company? I'll call them myself. We'll resolve it properly so this nightmare ends." It was a trap, a simple question she knew he could never answer. Daniel's face shifted from panic to cornered desperation. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked like a fish gasping for air on dry land. I can't tell you," he stammered. It's dangerous for you." "Oh, so you're still protecting me," Claire replied, a thin, humorless lip touching her lips. Seeing her son falter, Margaret immediately jumped in. "That's enough, Claire. Why are you interrogating your brother like this? He's under enough pressure already." For the first time, Claire turned to face her parents. Her gaze no longer carried rage. It carried something worse, profound disappointment. "Under pressure?" she said quietly. "Mom, Dad, not once did it occur to you to verify his story with me? Not once did you question whether it was true. Did you really trust me that little?" As she spoke, her eyes caught sight of a brown envelope on the table, windowed, unopened. The logo of Pacific National Bank was printed clearly in the corner. Through the thin paper, red lettering was faintly visible. Final notice. "This is from the bank, isn't it?" Claire said. She reached for the envelope. Her hands were steady as she tore it open. Daniel lunged forward. "Don't open that!" Too late. Claire pulled out the letter.
It was a formal foreclosure notice. If the 3 months of missed mortgage payments were not settled within 14 days, the bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings and auction the property. The combination of Daniel's unraveling lie and the stark reality printed in black and white finally shattered Margaret's defenses. Her rigid expression crumbled, the fury in her eyes faded, replaced by horror as the truth settled in. She looked at Daniel, then at Claire, then back at Daniel, as though seeing her children clearly for the first time. Robert, who had remained silent the entire time, finally broke. His shoulders sunk, a restrained sob escaped his lips. We were just afraid, Claire," he whispered, shame thick in his voice. "Daniel said he could handle it. He said this was the only way." "He said he was protecting us all," Claire finished quietly. She placed the foreclosure letter back on the table. The sound of paper touching wood echoed like a judge's gavel. "And look where that protection got us," she said, not accusing, but just stating fact. "This house isn't about to be lost because of imaginary collector debtors. It's about to be lost because of a lie you all chose to believe." Silence filled the room. Daniel stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Margaret sobbed softly into her hands. Robert shook his head in endless regret. The 3 of them sat there shattered, trapped in the ruins of the world they had built on fear and deception. And in the middle of those ruins, Claire stood tall. In her hand, she still held the foreclosure notice. She held the fate of the house. She held their future. All eyes were now on her, not with anger, not with superiority, but with desperate pleading. The battle was over, and she had won.
The question now was, what would she do with her victory? The silence after the confession felt heavier than any silence that had ever filled that house. There was no more anger, no more denial. What remained was naked, painful truth, and 3 broken people staring at the only one still standing. They were waiting for her verdict. Claire didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, forcing them to fully absorb the consequences of their choices. She walked slowly toward the window and pulled back the old, slightly dusty curtains. Outside, dusk was settling over Bellevue, washing the sky in streaks of orange and violet. She remembered standing at this very window as a child, waiting for her father to come home from work, hoping he'd bring her favorite chocolate chip cookies. This house held too many memories, sweet and bitter ones tangled together. Letting it disappear would feel like tearing out a piece of herself, but saving it the old way would only allow the same sickness to grow back. Finally, she turned around. Her gaze moved from one to the other, no longer burning with rage, no longer frozen with vengeance. Clear. "I'll help," she said. A faint breath of relief escaped Margaret's lips. Daniel lifted his head slightly. A flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. "But," Claire continued firmly, crushing their premature relief, "not the way I used to. From now on, everything changes." She stepped back toward the coffee table, reclaiming the center of the room. "There are conditions." She looked directly at her brother. "First condition, for you, Daniel, you will pay this mortgage debt, not me." Daniel's face went pale again. "But Claire, I don't have any money." "I know," she cut in calmly. "I'm going to lend it to you. Listen carefully. Lend, not give." His expression froze. "We're going to a notary. We'll draft a formal loan agreement, legal, documented, with a fixed monthly repayment schedule. To cover your first installment, you'll sell your motorcycle. After that, you'll get a job. Any job. It's time you stop living off fantasies about big projects." Daniel stared at her speechless. The concept of real accountability seemed foreign to him. "Second condition," Claire continued, turning to her parents, "the deed transfer from last month will be reversed. We'll handle the cancellation tomorrow. The ownership will be restructured.
divided into 3 names: Dad, Mom, and me. She paused deliberately. Daniel's name will not appear on the deed until every dollar he owes me is fully repaid. It was a decisive strike. Claire wasn't just saving the house, she was reclaiming control of it, ensuring she could never again be erased. And the final condition for you, Mom and Dad. Her expression softened, but her resolution did not. I will continue helping with your living expenses and medical bills like I always have, but I will no longer manage your finances. Margaret's head lifted slightly. I will transfer a fixed amount to Dad's account at the beginning of each month. The rest, you'll learn to manage yourselves. Any major financial decisions, any asset sales, any legal changes must be discussed with me, all 3 of us. Her voice remained steady. No more secrets, no more decisions behind my back. She let her words settle. This was no longer an offer of help. It was a new constitution for their family. No one argued. In their shattered state, they knew they had no leverage left. With a slow nod and tears of regret, Robert agreed. Margaret, her pride completely dissolved, lowered her gaze in silent acceptance. A week later, the notary's office in downtown Bellevue formalized the new order. Daniel, sullen-faced, signed the official debt acknowledgement to his sister. Robert and Margaret signed the deed cancellation and the newly structured ownership agreement. Claire sat there not as a victim, not as a villain, but as an architect rebuilding her family's foundation, this time on pillars of truth and responsibility. The months that followed were awkward. The wounds were too deep to heal overnight. Warmth didn't magically return, but something fundamental had shifted. Respect began to grow where exploitation once thrived. One afternoon, Claire stopped by the house. Margaret served tea. For the first time in years, they spoke about ordinary things, the garden, a television show, without complaints or veiled criticism. Robert showed her improved medical test results and asked about mutual fund investments he had read about in the Wall Street Journal. He actually listened to her explanation. Daniel wasn't home. Margaret mentioned he was working part-time at an auto repair shop while applying for full-time positions. He had made his first loan payment on time. When Claire left that evening, the sun was almost gone. She stepped out through the front door. The hinges no longer creaked. Daniel had fixed them. She paused and looked back at the house. The exterior paint was still aging, the structure unchanged, but it felt different. She got in her car, her heart lighter, not the false lightness of avoidance, but the true lightness born from healthy boundaries. She didn't regain the fairy tale family she might once have dreamed of. Instead, she gained something far more valuable, a real family, flawed, imperfect, where she now had a voice, control, and most importantly, respect. She drove back toward her apartment in Seattle, not as a daughter still running in circles, but as a sovereign woman who had finally found her path.